Hello class, welcome to Lab 4 Part 1. This is where we're going to start digging into Tableau. If you've already used Excel and Power BI, and if you've done the labs in this class you have, this is just one more powerful tool to add to your skill set. Tableau is used all over the place in accounting, auditing, fraud detection, financial planning, you name it. What makes it stand out is how quickly you can build interactive dashboards without any coding. Now, why learn Tableau if you've already seen Power BI? Simple. Different companies use different tools. Some companies love Power BI because it integrates so well with Microsoft products. Others prefer Tableau because of how easy it is to share dashboards and customize interactions. If you can use both, you're in a great spot. Before we dive into the lab, I want to show you a few real examples. And I've got the links here in the instructions for the lab. The first one I want to take a look at is the Ohio Checkbook site. It's built with Tableau and shows where every tax dollar goes in the state of Ohio. You can filter by agency, vendor, or type of spending. It's a great example of transparency through data. The next link I provided is one to a case study from Charles Schwab, where over 16,000 employees at the organization use Tableau to track everything from client asset flows to sales performance. It's a good look at how a big company uses Tableau to shift its culture towards data-driven decisions. And finally, I have a link to the Tableau public gallery. It's full of dashboards created by professionals and hobbyists alike. You'll find examples in finance, fraud detection, you name it. And it's a great place to get inspiration or see what's possible. So that's what Tableau is and why we're using it. Now let's roll up our sleeves and start building some visualizations. In this lab, we're going to be analyzing invoice payments and vendor activity to see if any accounts payable clerks might be acting suspiciously, for example, prioritizing certain vendors for faster payment processing in exchange for kickbacks. So if I scroll down the page here, you can see that I've provided the Excel workbook that we're going to connect to Tableau, as well as a data dictionary. So I'm going to click on these arrows to download both of those files, and then I'm going to launch Tableau. But before I launch Tableau, I do want to mention that if you go to the Home tab of our Canvas course, and then go to the Course Resources button, I have provided a link to the Tableau desktop that you can download for free. You just have to use your GRCC email to be able to do so. So you first have to apply for a student license, and then once you have that, you'll be able to download. You can see the system requirements of Tableau Desktop. It runs on Windows 10 or 11, as well as the Mac operating system. It does not run on Chromebook, so if you have a Chromebook, you're going to want to either borrow a laptop from the GRCC library. You can find more information here about that, or you could use your Chromebook and install an app called the Omnissa Horizon Virtual Desktop. And I've got more information about that in this video. There is a little bit of a lag with that option though, and you do have to be careful where you save your files when you're in that virtual desktop environment. When you launch Tableau, you're going to come to this screen where you're going to connect to either a file that contains the data, or you can also connect to different web servers. We have an Excel workbook, so I'm going to select that option, and then I'm going to browse for the file, and it's going to be titled Lab 4 Part 1. So now that I've connected that Excel workbook with Tableau, I can see that here. I can see the name of the file, and then I can also see the individual worksheets that are contained within the Excel file. There are 3 of them. We'll be taking a closer look at those in a moment. Now also I want to take a look at just sort of the basic navigation of the screen right now. So at the bottom of the screen we got the data source. The data source screen is where you connect and organize your data before you build any visuals. What we're going to do here right now is we're going to show that these 3 tables have a relationship to each other. There's a common field amongst these tables. This gets back into chapter 4 when we talk about database design. Also at the bottom of the screen here we have a tab that's labeled Sheet 1. This is a worksheet. A worksheet is a place where you build a single visual. So this is where we'll be creating all our individual charts in different worksheets. And then these other buttons have a plus sign next to each of them. So this one here is just going to create a new worksheet. This one is going to create a dashboard. So like I mentioned, a worksheet is going to have one visual, one chart on it, whereas a dashboard can have multiple charts on it. So you'll create the individual worksheets first, and then you'll connect them to the dashboard and show multiple sheets on the dashboard. And then lastly, we have a button to create a story. A story in Tableau is a sequence of visuals presented together to guide viewers through a data-driven narrative. It's less commonly used than dashboards and is best for making a point or walking someone through key findings step by step. In this lab, we will be building several visuals and a couple of dashboards, but we will not build a story. So now I'm going to go back to our data source tab, and I'm going to define the relationships between our three tables that are contained within the Excel workbook file. So the first thing I'm going to do is click and drag the accounts payable clerk table, and I'm going to drag it onto the left hand side of the canvas here. Alright, next I'm going to click and drag the AP invoice payments table, and I'm going to drag it to the right of that AP clerk table. Now this table is a little bit larger, so it takes a little bit of time to load. It has all the individual AP invoice payments that were made during a 3-month period of time. There are quite a few rows in the table, so it takes a little bit longer to get in there. And then finally, I'm going to click and drag the vendor table, and that's going to be purposely put to the right of the AP invoice payments table. Alright, so now I have all three tables showing. Now these lines are supposed to indicate the relationships between the tables. So there's automatically the system has identified a relationship between the AP clerk table and the AP invoice payments table. And if I mouse over that line, it shows the relationship as many to many. I can see that it's identified as many to many with the star, the asterisk, hyphen, and then the other asterisk. Well, that's not appropriate. The AP clerk table, what that contains, if I take a look at that down here, is it lists the accounts payable clerk ID number. So these are employee ID numbers, and then the names of all these different clerks. Well, each person is listed once. Each clerk is just listed once in this table, whereas in the accounts payable invoice payments table, this is listing a bunch of transactions. And the same accounts payable clerk may have been responsible for several of these different transactions. If we look, we see just a couple here. Here's accounts payable clerk 90 for this transaction number 562. We also see 90 again for 564. So an accounts payable clerk can appear many times in this accounts payable invoice payments table, but the accounts payable clerk individually is only listed once in the accounts payable clerk table. This is a one-to-many relationship. So I'm going to click back on that line, and I'm going to fix this. So I'm going to click on performance options, and then down here where I'm looking at cardinality, I can see that it's set up as a many-to-many relationship. Well, I got the AP clerk table, and each AP clerk only appears once. So that's on the left-hand side. So on the left-hand side, I'm going to select 1. And I'm going to leave the right-hand side, which is the AP invoice payments table, as many, because each clerk can appear many times in that table. So now that relationship is handled properly. I'm going to click on the relationship between the vendor table and the accounts payable invoice payments table. And if I mouse over that, that also was identified by the system as a many-to-many relationship, which it's not. The vendor table is similar to the accounts payable clerk table in a way, in that it lists each vendor just once, and then a vendor ID number associated with each one of them. And once again, if I click back on the invoice payments table, I can see vendor ID showing up there, but I can also see that the same vendor was involved in multiple transactions. Here's vendor 002, there they are again. So we have a one-to-many relationship again, where each vendor appears once in the vendor table, but they can appear many times in this invoice payments table. So click on that relationship one more time, click on performance options, change the cardinality. The vendor table's on the right, so that's going to be changed to 1. And now that relationship, if I mouse over it, I can see a many-to-one relationship, and over here, a one-to-many relationship. We're looking good. So this data source tab in Tableau is a good place to make sure that the system is properly recognizing the relationships between the tables. You can do things like, if I click on the top of one of these column headers here, I can see that I can do things like rename fields and create calculated fields, but I can't do a whole lot of data cleanup or transformations inside of Tableau Public. Tableau does sell another app called Tableau Prep, where you could do data prep, but you could also just do your data prep inside of Power Query in Excel, and or you could use something else like maybe Python and do it programmatically as well. But yeah, the Tableau Public isn't got a whole lot of features for doing data cleansing. So now that we've taken a look at the data source tab, I'm going to take a closer look at this first sheet. Our worksheets are where we create our visuals. And when we look at a worksheet, we can see that there is a data pane over here. So this shows all the individual tables within our Excel workbook, and then it also indicates the data type for each of the different columns or fields within there. And what you'll notice with those is that the ones that are labeled with ABC and the ones that are labeled with a calendar icon, those are considered to be dimensions within Tableau. That's the language they use. You can also see that my eyes are bad, but these are colored in blue, whereas the pound sign's in green. So the dimensions are always in blue. And dimensions, you can think of them as categorical fields like names or dates. They're used to group or label data. Whereas the measures, which are in green, those are numeric fields within the data set that can be aggregated. We can do things like sum them up or find the average. Also in this data pane, you can see there are two tabs at the top, data and analytics. I'm going to switch over to analytics. So what this can do is it can do a little bit of aggregation inside of the model. It can summarize and give you lines for the average with a 95% confidence interval, and so on. We'll be applying some of these ideas to some of the visuals we create in the lab. So I'm going to click back over on the Data tab there. So this area up top where we see columns and rows, this is referred to as the columns and row shelves. And basically these are going to define the layout of the chart. We're going to click and drag these dimensions and measures into these columns and rows, and it's going to create our visuals. We also have some other areas over here. We have what's called the marks card. The marks card is going to control the appearance of visual. That's where we're going to change the colors, the size of things, the labels, tooltips, etc. Filters, if we want to control what data appears and narrow it down within the visual, that's where we'll put things into the filter shelf. The pages shelf, that lets us break a visual into multiple views by a field. This is less commonly used, and we won't actually get into that in this lab. This space is called the view area. This is the main canvas where our different charts or visuals will appear. And then finally, this panel over here is called the Show Me panel. And what this does, it suggests chart types based on the fields that you select for both the column and the row. So what you'll see is some of these options will appear highlighted with a border around them based on the selections of the fields that are showing up in the column and the row. And we'll see that in just a minute. So now that I've given you a brief tour of this worksheet screen, we're going to get started with our first visual. So in this lab, we're going to be visualizing data to explore patterns that might suggest vendor favoritism or unusual payment behaviors. We're looking to identify whether certain accounts payable clerks might be colluding with vendors by processing payments faster or more frequently than others, and perhaps they're getting some kind of kickback for doing so. So the first visual we're going to put together is going to be a bar chart, and it's going to look at the total invoice amount by clerk. And why does this matter? Well, some clerks may have unusually high payment totals. That might reflect legitimate workload differences, but it also could raise concerns about favoritism. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I am going to drag the AP clerk ID number to the column shelf. Next, I'm going to drag the invoice amount to the row shelf. And look at that, we've already got a column chart, a bar chart, and what we have down here are the AP clerk ID numbers, and we have the sum of all of the invoices they processed for payment during a period of time, during a 3-month period of time. We can see one clerk authorized a larger sum of payments than the others. We can see the dollar amount there. The next highest, 22,000, this one 29,000. So this chart helps surface which clerks are authorizing the highest totals. We can follow up on anything that seems out of proportion. Now, what I can do in this sheet here is practice a couple things. One thing might be to rename the sheet. So this is very similar to Excel, and then I can just come down here, right click, rename, type in whatever I want, call it invoice, total invoice amount by clerk. Maybe I want to sort these columns in descending order. So if I want to do that, I can come up top here, and I think this one is descending order, sure enough, largest to smallest, to sort of help visually separate them out. I can come over to the marks card here, and I can change the color scheme if I wanted. I can change the size or width of the columns here. It's really up to you. If I want to change the label for the vertical axis here, I can do that. I can just right click on the axis, edit axis, and then I can change the title right here. And I'm going to change it to total invoice amount. And I see it's updated now. So just because we have a couple of clerks that authorize more payments than others doesn't mean that we've found fraud, but it gives something to maybe consider following up with if it seems way out of proportion. So now I'm going to click on the Add New Worksheet button down here at the bottom and build out a second visual. So in this visual, we're going to be looking at the monthly payments over time. We're going to build a line chart showing the total invoice amounts paid over time here for this 3-month period of time that's represented in our data set. And why this matters, we're looking for unusual spikes in payments which might suggest manual interventions or suspicious activity, especially around month end or weekends where we maybe shouldn't see much activity on the weekends if we're closed, and so on. So to build this one, I am going to click and drag the payment date to the column shelf. And then I am going to right click on that date pill. So I'm going to right click there and I'm going to select exact date. Next, I'm going to drag the invoice amount over to the rows shelf. So now there we go. We've got a line chart showing the amounts that were paid in total over the period of time. We'll do a little cleanup here. I'm going to rename the sheet by right clicking on it and then typing in that name. Go with monthly payments over time. And when I do that, when I rename the sheet, you can see that it automatically changes the title of the chart as well within the sheet. And on the vertical axis, I'm going to right click on that, select edit access, and I'm going to type out invoice amount paid each day. Close that out. I can see that's updated as well. See, there's quite a bit of variation day to day with these payments. That might be normal. But what we might consider doing with a chart like this is look for payment spikes or gaps or any strange patterns. Do they line up with weekends, holidays, or month end? So now I'm going to build another visual. So I'm going to click on the New Worksheet button. And in this visual, we're going to create a highlight table, and it's going to be a color-coded table which is going to show which accounts payable clerks pay which vendors the most. So now we're getting closer to where we want to be in terms of seeing if there might be any evidence of any improper relationships at all. So for this one, I'm going to drag vendor name to the column shelf. Let's see, vendor name right here. And then I'm going to drag the accounts payable clerk ID number to the row shelf. Now I'm going to drag the invoice amount to the color area of the marks card. And then I can sort of look at what was built. So the rows were the accounts payable clerk ID numbers. We see that here. And then the columns were the vendor names. We see those there. And then the intersections of the vendors with the clerks those cells are filled in with color based on the values in the invoice amount measure. And it's sort of doing a heat map. What it's doing, we can see here, it's taking the sum of the invoices that fell into that intersection. And what we see here with this little heat map is that there's a couple of values that are sort of sticking out, or a couple cells intersection. So it looks like SLC Incorporated and Accounts Payable Clerk 40, and then also Journeys Company with Accounts Payable Clerk 80. Those are the darkest shades. Now, I think I'm actually going to change the coloring around a little bit and have red be the ones that are sort of indicating an interesting pattern. So I'm going to click color on the marks card, and then I'm going to select edit colors, and then we've got these different palettes that we can choose from. And I am going to go with red, green, gold diverging, and then I want the two that are sort of standing out there to show up in red. So I'm going to click reverse, and what that did is it made the larger sums show up in red and the lower amounts in green. And we can see those two are the ones that are sort of standing out. Lastly, I am going to right click the name of the sheet and change it to Payments Made by AP Clerk Highlight Table. Alright, so now I'm going to build another visual, and this one is also going to be a highlight table. So just to save myself some time, I'm going to right click on this worksheet that we just created for the highlight table, and I'm going to select duplicate. So it duplicated that table here. I can see that it just appended number 2 to the end of its name. Now this highlight table is going to show different information though. This one is going to be looking at the days to pay by each accounts payable clerk. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at the number of days from the invoice date to the payment date. So how quickly did each invoice get paid on the average by each clerk. So we're going to change this table around a little bit. We still want to show each individual clerk for the rows and each individual vendor for the columns, but now I'm not interested in the sum of the invoices. I'm going to be looking at the differences between the two dates. So I'm going to remove this out of here. So I'm selecting the drop down there and clicking remove, and then what I'm going to do is create a calculated field, because I don't have a field showing the number of days between the invoice date and the payment date, so I have to do something to calculate that. So I'm going to come down here on the data pane, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to select create a calculated field. The first thing you do with this calculated field is you have to name it, and I'm going to call it days to pay. And then next, I've provided the formula, the function that we're going to use, as well as how to use it in the instructions for the lab. But Tableau, just like Excel, has different functions, and they take arguments, and you need to know the syntax and how they're entered. So this one that we're using is called date difference, and basically it's going to subtract the dates between the invoice date and the payment date and return the number of days that fell between those two dates. I am going to provide in the course resources area a link to this Tableau page, which shows all of the functions that are available in Tableau, and it shows how to use them, shows the arguments with examples, and it tells me that the calculation is valid, so I'm going to click OK. And now that I've done that, I'm going to click and drag that days to pay measure, and I'm going to drop it in the colors area of the mark card. And we have some colors shown here. Now what I want to do with this though is I'm really looking at the not the sum of the days to pay, but what I want to know is the average amount of time that each accounts payable clerk paid each of these vendors. It's more interesting to look at the average amount of time. So I'm going to click that drop down and change this to average. And to do that, I go to measure, and then I can see sum is selected and change that to average right there. And then I'm going to change the colors again. So clicking on the colors in the mark card, edit colors. I'm going to use that same palette I used earlier. So red, green, gold, diverging. And with this table, you got to think about this for a minute. We're looking at the average number of days to pay. So the vendors are motivated to get their money earlier. So they would potentially be willing to give kickbacks if accounts payable clerk paid them early, because they get their money early, they can use it, they can earn a return on it. So the lower numbers for this average days to pay are the ones that are suspicious. So I'm not going to reverse this color scheme, because the reds represent the lower numbers and the greens are the higher numbers. So the reds are the suspicious ones already. So no need to reverse the order of the coloring here. And what we're seeing is SLC and journeys with accounts payable clerk 80 with journey, and SLC with accounts payable clerk 40. And I think those might have been the same clerks that were sort of marked by the other highlight table earlier. We'll take a look at that in just a second. Before I look at the two highlight tables together, I'm just going to rename this one by right clicking on its tab, and I am going to call it Days to Pay by AP Clerk Highlight Table. And actually, I forgot to do something in each of these visuals that's really important for you. I want your names in each of them. So I'm going to click at the end of each of them and add my name, because what you're going to be doing to turn stuff in is you're going to be taking a bunch of screenshots. So I'm going to be definitely wanting to see each of your names in each of these different these visuals. All right, make sure you do that. I've done that for each one of the different worksheets that we've created. I've added my name to the title. So now that we've created several visuals, we're going to combine some of the visuals together and build a dashboard. So I'm going to click on the new dashboard button down here. And in a dashboard, we are going to see the different sheets that we've already created listed out, and we're going to basically click and drag them to this canvas area, to the view area. Now before I do that, I can see that the size of this dashboard is based on the common dimensions of phone. And for right now, because I want to be able to display these dashboards properly on the screen, I'm going to change the dimensions here. So I'm going to click on that drop down, and then where it says range, I'm going to select fixed size, and then I'm going to increase the number of pixels, and I'm going to go with 1200 wide by 800 high. And the reason why the software defaults to phone is because many dashboards are placed on the web, and more user traffic comes from phones than from computers and other devices these days. So that's why the default was phone. But for our purposes, I just need a little more real estate to sort of build this out. So now I am going to drag the two dashboards. So let me click on the first one, payments made by AP Clerk Highlight Table, and I just drag that to the top of the page. I'm going to stack them one on top of each other. So I'm going to click the Days to Pay and drop it down below. So we got them on top of each other there, and now we can sort of see how they line up. So we can see that in the payments made by AP Clerk table, that these two cells were highlighted as being a larger sum of payments made for each of these intersections of AP Clerk and vendor name. So it looks like AP Clerk 80 paid Journey's company more than in total than any of the other intersections in the table. And similarly for SLC Incorporated, it looks like AP 40 also paid a larger sum there or authorized a larger sum to that company than the other data points. And then looking at the days to pay by AP Clerk table, we're looking at the average time to pay invoices, and we have the same two intersections, SLC Incorporated and AP 40, and then Journeys Company and AP80. So that's telling us that on this data set, the average time to pay for this intersection of clerk and vendor was less than the other data points within the data set. Clear and convincing evidence of fraud? No, but definitely an interesting pattern, something to look further into for the company. However, highlight tables are great for spotting patterns, like which AP clerk paid certain vendors more or paid them faster on average, but they only show the summary, total amounts or average days to pay. A box plot is another type of visual that lets us dig deeper by showing the full distribution of payment amounts and times. We can see things like, are most payments consistent? Are there any unusually fast or slow payments? Is one clerk's pattern very different from the others? This will help us spot outliers, those rare but suspicious cases that might suggest favoritism or fraud. So the box plot doesn't just tell us what the average is, it shows us how the clerk consistently behaves across all payments. And that's what we'll do next. But before I do that though, I do need to rename this dashboard. So I'm going to right click and rename, and I am going to call it clerk-vendor highlight comparison. Alright, so now I'm going to build those box plots. So to do that, actually I'm just going to pull up the two highlight tables. I'll start with the payments made by AP clerk highlight table. I'm going to right click on that one and I'm going to select duplicate. So now I've got the duplicate. See the number 2 up top there. I'm going to start off by renaming it. So I think I'll call it payments by clerk box plot. Here we go. And now I really don't need to change anything for the rows or columns or colors, but what I need to do is go over to the Show Me panel. And I mentioned this at the beginning of the video, but I actually didn't show you until right now. Based on the values that are selected for rows and columns, the Show Me panel highlights with a border which visuals are applicable to that selection. And the one that we want is the box and whisker plot, which is this one. But that's sort of a helpful tool with this Show Me, is that based on your selection, it shows you all the different possibilities based on the selection. But the one I want is the box and whisker. Okay, so let's talk about what this box and whisker plot, because for most of you, this is probably new. So a box plot shows the spread of your data. The box itself, right here, captures the middle 50% of values. The line in the middle of the box is the median, the middle value. 50% of the values are above it and 50% are below it. These lines that extend are referred to as the whiskers, and they extend to the typical lowest and typical highest values. Any dots that are outside of the whiskers, those are outliers, values that are unusually high or low compared to the rest of the data. And here's what's interesting. If we mouse over this outlier that we see with AP40, we can see that it's a big payment outside of the usual range. And if we mouse over it, we can see that it was made to that company, that vendor that we were interested in earlier, SLC Incorporated. That's a red flag worth investigating. And for the other vendor and accounts payable clerk combination with AP80 and Journeys Incorporated, if I mouse over that highest data point, which is right at the end of the whisker there, I see, yep, it's Journeys Company there. We don't see an outlier, but we do see that their payment to that vendor is sitting right at the edge of the whisker. So it's still high, but not unusual enough to be counted as an outlier. So while AP80's payment to Journeys Company isn't an outlier, it's right at the high end. So while it's not statistically unusual, it's still worth taking a closer look at given the pattern we saw earlier. But we should also look at the box and whisker plot with the days to pay, which we'll do next. So to build that box plot, I'm going to select the days to pay highlight table, right click and duplicate. And once again, based on the selections for the rows and columns, the Show Me panel shows the visuals that are open to me, and I want to select the box and whisker plot. So taking a look at this one, we also see outlier with the amount of time to pay with AP40, and if I mouse over that outlier, I do see that it's SLC incorporated. We do see a couple outliers with some other vendors, and their average days to pay were a little bit lower than the typical for them. But remember that when we looked at those other accounts payable clerks and vendor combinations, that they weren't flagged for amount. So I don't think that those are something, but this one is definitely something we want to look into, because this is showing that we have an outlier from the way that this accounts payable clerk normally processes payments after they've been approved by someone higher up. This data point's much lower in time, and the amount for this clerk with that vendor was also higher, so definitely suspicious. And then the other one that we were suspicious about, once again, we have almost the same kind of situation. If I click on this this data point at the bottom here, at the end of this whisker, I can see that it is accounts payable clerk 80 and a payments to Journeys company. And once again, while this payment amount of time to pay isn't an outlier, it's right at the low end. So once again, while it's not statistically unusual, it's still worth taking a closer look at, given the pattern we saw earlier. So to wrap this up, I am going to rename this worksheet to days to pay box plot, and then finally I'm going to create one more dashboard that's going to show both of those box plots. I'm going to select the new dashboard button, and I am going to look for those box plots. So there's one of them. I'm going to click and drag up top here, and it used all the space, and that's because I didn't change the dimensions. So I should change the dimensions of the canvas here. So I'm going to click on the drop down, and from range I'm going to change that to fixed size. I'm going to go with the same size, 1200 wide by 800 pixels high. Now I've got more space there, and now I'm going to look for the other box plot, which is here, and I'm going to drop it down below. So I've got one on top of the other, and I can see here once again those relationships, especially with AP40 and SLC incorporated. We see the outlier there with the amount in total that was paid out, and then the average time to pay. And then I forgot it again, but I really should have my my name in each of these visuals. So to do that, I got to go back to my box plot worksheet and then just rename and just add my name at the end of it, and do the same thing with the other box plot. And if I go back to my dashboard after that's done, it should show those names. Yep, it's dynamically changed there. And then lastly, I'm going to rename this this final dashboard, and I'm going to go with box plot outlier dashboard. So for this assignment, I am going to ask you to take screenshots of all the different visuals that we made. Now those dashboards that we created two dashboards, they have two visuals on them each, so you don't need to have separate screenshots of the box plots from the original visuals. The dashboards will have both of them. Just make sure your name is in the title of each visual. To do a screenshot, you can hit the print screen button on your keyboard if you're using a Windows computer. Otherwise, you can use the snipping tool. If you come down here in Windows and type in snipping, you can pull that up, hit new, and you can basically click and drag and select what you want to be screenshot, and then you can basically paste this into your Word document. If you have a Mac computer, you can press the Command key and hold it, and then press the key, Shift key and then the number 4, and that will allow you to basically do the same thing as a snipping tool. You'll be able to click and drag and select an area to screenshot and put it into your Word document. In addition to the screenshots, I also have 3 reflection questions that I want you to respond to within the Word document. So type your answers. They don't have to be really lengthy, like 2 to 4 sentences each. and then just submit your work on Canvas as either a Word document file or a PDF file. All right, thank you for listening. If you have any questions at all, please reach out.